The story begins not in the spotlight, but by the sea. On the coast of Massachusetts, the Atlantic Ocean meets the land with a gentle, persistent rhythm. The salt air carries the scent of pine and brine. Here, in the town of Hyannis Port, a large white house with green shutters stands overlooking the water. Its clapboard siding has been weathered by decades of sea breeze. In the summer, the light is golden and clear. It filters through the leaves of old trees and dances on the manicured lawn that slopes down to the shore. This was the summer home of the Kennedy family. For a young John, known to his family as Jack, this place was a constant. It was a world of sailboats rocking on gentle swells, of wooden docks creaking softly underfoot. The wide porch of the house was a place for quiet conversation or for reading a book in a wicker chair. The sound here was the lap of waves, the cry of gulls, the rustle of pages turning. His early years were split between this coastal sanctuary and the elegant streets of Brookline, Massachusetts. The family's brick home there was solid and respectable. It sat among other fine homes in a neighborhood of tree-lined avenues. Mornings might bring the soft clatter of a milk wagon horse on cobblestones. The light inside fell in long rectangles through tall windows, illuminating polished wooden floors and the spines of books in a library. John was not a robust child. He faced long periods of illness that kept him indoors. During these times, the world came to him through stories. He would lie in bed, surrounded by the quiet of a sunlit room. He would lose himself in tales of adventure and history. The heroes of those pages were sailors and kings. They were men of action and words. This quiet, solitary reading shaped his imagination in a profound and lasting way. The family was large and vibrant. Dinner tables were full of conversation and debate. His father, Joseph, encouraged a spirit of fierce competition and intellectual curiosity. His mother, Rose, ensured a foundation of faith and discipline. But in the quieter moments, Jack would often seek a space of his own. He would walk alone along the beach, hands in his pockets, watching the horizon where the sea met the sky. Those horizons seemed limitless from the shore. The water stretched out, a vast, calming plain of blue and gray. Sailboats with white sails dotted the view, moving with a silent grace. It was a scene of profound peace and possibility. The young boy walking that beach was absorbing the calm, steady presence of the ocean. He was learning the patterns of the tides, the constancy of the lighthouse beam at night. These were the first, gentle lessons in resilience and navigation. The light in New England has a particular quality, especially in the late afternoon. It turns everything warm and soft. It gilds the white clapboard of the houses. It makes the green of the lawn seem richer. It casts long, peaceful shadows. In this gentle light, a boy's character was formed. Not through loud events, but through the steady rhythm of seasons. Through the peace of a library. Through the endless whisper of the sea. Years passed, and the young man from the shore found his way to Washington. The city in the 1950s moved at a different pace. Its grand, neoclassical buildings stood as white monuments against a wide sky. The air in spring was sweet with the scent of cherry blossoms. In the Senate office building, hallways were quiet, lined with dark wood and marble. The click of heels on the floor was a soft, measured sound. It was a world of paper, of quiet conversation, of deep thought. John Kennedy now had an office here. It was a room filled with the soft glow of a desk lamp, even in the daytime. Bookshelves reached from floor to ceiling, packed with volumes on history, government, and biography. The desk was often cluttered, not with chaos, but with the ongoing work of a curious mind. There were memos, reports, and always a book open to a marked page. A large window looked out onto the Capitol grounds, framing a view of trees and walking paths. His day would begin early. The city was often still wrapped in a soft, blue morning haze. He would arrive, sometimes moving with a slight stiffness from old war injuries. The routine was steady. There were meetings with aides, their voices low and earnest. There was the drafting of speeches, each word weighed for its meaning and rhythm. The work was in the details, in understanding a bill about labor, or the complexities of foreign policy for a newly independent nation. But it was in the quieter hours that the room truly came to life. After the staff had left, when the hallway outside was silent, Kennedy would often sit back in his chair. He would gaze at the rows of books. He was not just a senator here, he was a writer and a historian. During a long convalescence from back surgery, he had written a book. It was called Profiles in Courage. It told the stories of senators who had made difficult, principled stands. The act of writing that book required a deep stillness. It required long hours of research in libraries that smelled of old paper and leather. It required contemplation. The courage he wrote about was not the loud, battlefield kind. It was a quiet, moral courage. It was the strength to stand alone, if necessary, for a deeply held belief. This theme resonated deeply with him. It spoke to the thoughtful boy who had read books by the sea. Outside his window, the seasons changed in Washington. The cherry blossoms would bloom in a cloud of pink and white, then fall like soft snow. Summer brought thick, green foliage and the hum of cicadas. Autumn turned the leaves to flame. Winter saw the branches of the trees become stark and beautiful against a gray sky. The steady cycle of the political year moved alongside these natural changes. Hearings, votes, recesses. He would sometimes leave the office late, when the Capitol dome was illuminated against the night sky. The walk to his car was through quiet, lamplit streets. The light from the street lamps created pools of gold on the sidewalk. These moments of transition, from the focused world of the office to the calm of the evening, were times of reflection. He was building a career, yes. But more than that, he was building an understanding. An understanding of the immense, delicate machinery of democracy. It was a machinery powered not by force, but by reason, patience, and, sometimes, a quiet, profound courage. The campaign for the presidency began not with a shout, but with a conversation. It moved across America like a gentle wave. It was 1960. John Kennedy traveled from town to town, city to city. He did not just speak in grand auditoriums. Often, he spoke in town squares, on the steps of courthouses, at factory gates at shift change. The scenes were slices of American life, painted in the soft light of dawn or the golden hue of late afternoon. At a factory gate in West Virginia, morning mist hung in the valleys. Men in work jackets and caps stood listening, their breath visible in the cool air. Kennedy stood on the back of a flatbed truck, without an overcoat, connecting with them directly. The light was pale and diffuse. It was a moment of raw, quiet politics, far from the glittering ballrooms. It was about shared humanity, about the hope for a better day after a hard night's work. The campaign train, named the Caroline after his daughter, became a familiar sight. It would wind through the heartland, its whistle a lonely, beautiful sound across the fields. From the back platform, Kennedy would address crowds gathered at small-town stations. Children sat on their parents' shoulders. Families stood together on the platform, their faces uplifted in the soft light of an autumn day. The scene was one of connection, of a candidate reaching out, literally and figuratively, to touch the hands extended toward him. Television brought this campaign into American living rooms. The debates were a new phenomenon. In a television studio, under bright, hot lights, the stage was set. But before the cameras rolled, there was a quiet moment. Kennedy sat in a simple chair, going over his notes one last time. The studio was a hive of quiet tension, technicians moving softly, adjusting lights and microphones. This new medium required a different kind of presence, calm, poised, direct. The most famous moment of that campaign, perhaps, was not a speech, but a visual one. It was a photograph of Senator Kennedy sitting in a rocking chair. He was at his home in Hyannis Port, taking a brief respite from the relentless travel. The rocking chair was on a porch. He was reading a newspaper, his glasses on, completely absorbed. The simplicity of the image was powerful. It showed not just a politician, but a man. A thoughtful man in a moment of peaceful retreat, framed by the familiar, comforting architecture of his home. That sense of a new generation of energy and hope was best captured in the open air. Huge rallies filled city plazas. But even in these large gatherings, the feeling was often one of optimistic calm, not frenzy. People came not out of anger, but out of a desire for a fresh beginning. They held signs that simply said Kennedy. The candidate's voice, with its distinct Boston accent, spoke of a new frontier. It was not a call to conflict, but an invitation to a journey. An invitation to explore new possibilities in science, in art, in the very idea of what America could be. On election night, the family gathered in the Hyannis Port house. The mood was one of anxious hope. Telephones rang in the background. News tickers clattered softly. Outside, the night was dark and cold, but the house was a warm pool of light. In the living room, maps were spread out, states being colored in as returns came in. It was a long, slow vigil, stretching into the early hours. The final outcome was uncertain, balanced on a handful of votes in a few key states. It was a quiet, tense, and deeply human drama, unfolding in a living room by the sea, far from the cheering crowds. Inauguration Day dawned cold and clear. A fresh blanket of snow had fallen on Washington, covering the city in a silent, white hush. The sunlight that morning was brilliant, reflecting off the snow and the white marble of the buildings. It was a day that seemed scrubbed clean, full of crystalline light and sharp shadows. The Capitol steps, where the ceremony would take place, were a stage set against a deep blue winter sky. Before the ceremony, in a quiet room, John Fitzgerald Kennedy prepared. The weight of the moment was immense, but the rituals were simple and human. The careful knotting of a tie. The straightening of a jacket. A final moment of private thought, looking out a window at the transformed city. The air was so cold it was still, holding the sounds of the gathering crowds at a distance, like a soft murmur. Then, the walk to the podium. The breath of thousands hung in the air like mist. His own breath formed small clouds as he began to speak. The words he delivered are remembered for their call to action. But the scene itself was one of breathtaking stillness and clarity. A young president, without an overcoat, his voice steady in the freezing air. The focused faces of the audience, from former presidents to ordinary citizens, all united in that singular, frozen moment of transition. Later, the White House became a home. The Kennedy family brought a new life to its grand, historical rooms. Caroline, a small child, could be seen playing in the wide hallways. Her laughter was a soft, joyful sound against the backdrop of history. The family living quarters on the second floor were decorated with personal touches, paintings, books, simple family photographs. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the yellow oval room, landing on sofas and carpets, making the space feel warm and livable. President Kennedy often worked in the Oval Office late into the evening. At night, the room took on a different character. The harsh daylight was replaced by the soft glow of desk lamps. The green of the carpet and the resolute desk seemed richer in the lamplight. He would sit, often rocking gently in his chair, reading reports or memos. The only sounds might be the turning of a page, the quiet tick of a clock, the distant hum of the city. It was in these quiet hours that the solitude of command was most felt, and the need for clear, calm judgment was most acute. The White House grounds were a sanctuary. On a warm spring afternoon, President Kennedy might take a short walk along the colonnade. He would stop to admire the blooming magnolia trees, a gift from another era. The south lawn stretched out, a vast expanse of green under the open sky. Sometimes, Caroline and John Jr. would be playing there, their small figures full of energy against the serene backdrop. These were moments of normalcy, precious and peaceful, within the most extraordinary of circumstances. The administration also brought a celebration of arts and culture to the White House. One memorable evening, the East Room was transformed. Chairs were set in rows before a small stage. The crystal chandeliers sparkled. The audience, dressed in fine evening wear, waited in a hushed, anticipatory silence. Then, the world-renowned cellist Pablo Casals, who had not performed in America for many years, began to play. The notes of Bach's suites filled the grand room, not with grandeur, but with a profound, intimate peace. It was a testament to the belief that beauty and wisdom were not separate from governance, but essential to it. In that room, for a time, history was not made with proclamations, but with the serene, soaring voice of a cello. The pressures of the presidency were constant, but they were often met in stillness. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962 was the gravest test. The world held its breath, aware that the two great powers stood on the brink. Yet, inside the White House, the process of decision-making was deliberate, careful, and shrouded in necessary secrecy. The meetings of the Executive Committee, or ExComm, were long and exhaustive. They were not scenes of shouting, but of intense, sober discussion. The cabinet room during those 13 days became the center of the world. Sunlight would move across the long mahogany table throughout the day. It would illuminate maps, documents, and the weary, focused faces of advisors. Ashtrays filled slowly. Cups of coffee grew cold. The arguments were passionate but controlled. The goal was not victory in a dramatic sense, but the prevention of catastrophe. It was a chess game played with the highest stakes, requiring not impulsive moves, but the deepest strategic patience. President Kennedy often listened more than he spoke. He would lean back in his chair at the head of the table, fingers steepled, absorbing every point of view. He would walk around the room, pausing to look out the windows into the garden, thinking. These moments of quiet reflection, amidst the storm of conflicting advice, were critical. He was weighing not just military options, but human ones. The consequence of a single mistake was the unthinkable loss of millions of lives. In the evenings, he would retreat to the private residence, to the company of his family. The simple act of reading a bedtime story to his children was a mooring to reality. In Caroline's room, with its soft nightlight, the world outside with its missiles and ultimatums receded. The sound of a child's voice asking for just one more page was a powerful reminder of what was truly at stake. It was the ordinary world of bedtimes and hugs that had to be preserved. The decision was for a naval quarantine, a word chosen carefully over blockade. It was a measured first step, a firm but not immediately aggressive act. The orders went out to the Navy. Ships moved into position in the calm, blue waters of the Atlantic. From the air, those waters would have looked vast and peaceful, the ships like tiny, purposeful toys. But beneath the surface, the tension was immense. Sailors stood watch under wide skies, scanning horizons, waiting. It was a tense peace, held by resolve and the hope that reason would prevail. Behind the scenes, a secret, personal diplomacy unfolded. Letters passed between Kennedy and Premier Khrushchev. They were not just statements of policy, but appeals to reason and shared humanity. The writing of these letters was done in the deepest quiet of the Oval Office late at night. A single lamp lit the page. The words had to be precise, clear, and leave a path open for the other man to step back with dignity. It was a dialogue conducted in shadows, with the whole world in the balance. When the crisis passed, there was no celebration, only a profound, weary relief. The clouds that had gathered over the world began to disperse. The immediate threat was gone. In the aftermath, President Kennedy spoke of the need to re-examine our attitude toward peace itself. He spoke not in triumph, but with a sober understanding of how close the world had come. The lesson of those 13 days was not about the glory of confrontation, but about the absolute necessity of patience, empathy, and the relentless, quiet pursuit of a peaceful solution. The resolve forged in that quiet room had steered the world away from the abyss. While one crisis was averted, another kind of challenge was embraced, one not of fear, but of wonder. President Kennedy looked not just across the earth, but upward, toward the sky. In the spring of 1961, he stood before a joint session of Congress. In a voice of calm conviction, he set a goal so audacious it captured the imagination of the planet. He proposed that America should commit to landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth before the decade was out. The announcement was made in the solemn, formal setting of the Capitol. But the vision it invoked was of boundless space. It was a call to peaceful exploration, to the expansion of human knowledge. It was not framed as a battle, but as a great adventure for all mankind. The response was not immediate action, but first, a great collective intake of breath, followed by the slow, meticulous turning of minds toward a seemingly impossible problem. The work began in places like Cape Canaveral, Florida. The landscape there was flat and marshy, brushed by sea winds. Giant gantries, skeletal and silver, rose against the sky like modern cathedrals. In the early morning, mist would hang over the launch pads. The first light of dawn would turn the rockets a soft orange. There was a profound silence in these moments before ignition, a silence filled with anticipation and the hum of technology. President Kennedy visited these sites. He stood on observation decks, squinting against the bright Florida sun. He looked up at the massive Saturn V rocket, still in development. He spoke with engineers and scientists, men with slide rules and lab coats, whose work was done in quiet rooms filled with blackboards covered in complex equations. Theirs was a world of theory and precision, of solving one tiny problem at a time. The grand vision of the moon was built on millions of these small, peaceful acts of intellect. In a famous speech at Rice University in 1962, he made the vision poetic. He stood under a bright Texas sky. The stadium was filled with young faces, students who represented the future that would build this future. He spoke of space as the new sea, and of the moon and planets as new shores to be explored. He spoke of doing these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. The tone was not one of warlike competition, but of serene confidence in human capability. Back in Washington, the progress was tracked in quiet offices at NASA. Models of lunar modules sat on desks. Photographs of the barren lunar surface, taken by unmanned probes, were studied. The Earth, seen from space for the first time in these photographs, was a beautiful blue and white marble, hanging in the blackness. This image alone, a planet without borders, serene and whole, was a powerful, silent argument for the mission's deeper purpose. It fostered a sense of shared destiny. The Apollo program became a national project, but it lived in the details. It lived in a technician carefully soldering a wire in a clean room. It lived in an astronaut practicing in a simulator, a calm voice reading checklists. It lived in the quiet of mission control, a room of focused men in white shirts, monitoring streams of data. The journey of 240,000 miles began with these moments of perfect, peaceful concentration. President Kennedy's vision had lit a fuse, but the flame that traveled along it was steady, deliberate, and bright with the promise of discovery, not destruction. Time moves forward, but some moments are captured in amber, in memory, in soft light. The final chapter of this story is not one of an end, but of a lasting presence. It is found in the quiet places that remember. In Arlington National Cemetery, on a gentle hillside overlooking the city of Washington, an eternal flame burns. It is a simple jet of blue and white fire, dancing steadily within a circle of smooth stone. The flame does not roar, it is a quiet, persistent symbol. The gravesite is a place of profound peace. The grass is a deep, well-tended green. The white headstones of the cemetery march in perfect, silent rows across the rolling hills. From this vantage point, one can see the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, and the Capitol Dome across the river. It is a view that connects the present to the past, the individual to the republic. Visitors come and stand in silence, their reflections mingling with the reflection of the sky and the polished stone. The legacy of those 1,000 days is woven into the fabric of the nation in subtle ways. It is in the continued exploration of space, a journey he championed. It is in the words of the Civil Rights Address he delivered, where he framed equality as a moral issue, as a quest to make the American promise real for all citizens. That speech was given on a summer evening, and the words were calm, reasoned, and forceful, appealing to the conscience of the nation. But perhaps the most enduring image is not of politics, but of humanity. It is the image of a father and his children. A photograph of President Kennedy in the Oval Office, smiling as his young son, John Jr., plays beneath the resolute desk. The boy is in his own little world, while the father looks on with an expression of pure, unguarded affection. The great issues of state are, for that captured second, held at bay. The moment is universal and timeless, the love of a parent for a child. The style and spirit of those years came to be called Camelot, after the musical he admired. It suggested a brief, shining moment of grace, intellect, and hope. While no era is without its shadows, the light that is remembered is a warm one. It is the light of a sailboat on the water at Hyannis Port. The light of a desk lamp in a Senate office, burning late. The light of a hopeful crowd's faces on a crisp campaign morning. History moves on as it must. New challenges arise, new leaders step forward. But the past remains a source of reflection, of lessons learned in quiet and in storm. The story of John F. Kennedy, when told gently, is not a story of unblemished triumph or simple tragedy. It is a story of a man who navigated immense pressures with a preference for calm reason, who loved the sea and books, who believed in the power of words and the reach of ideas, who saw the moon not as a distant prize, but as a new horizon for all humankind. And so, we leave him there, in the peaceful places of memory, by the eternal flame that burns steadily against the dusk, in the pages of a book in a quiet library, or walking along a beach, the same beach where he played as a boy, with the endless, whispering ocean before him and the wide, hopeful sky above. The light is fading now, turning to soft blues and purples, and the first star appears, clear and bright. A peaceful night settles over the landscape, and the story rests.